So, Dr. Huddleston, how long have you known Miss Starr Hoover? Okay.
Roughly about 7 years.
How would you evaluate Miss Hoover as a professor?
I find her to be respectable. She's intellectual. She's compassionate. And she honors God by the way she conducts her classes.
Thank you, Dr. Huddleston.
So, Miss Starr Hoover, what got you really interested in being a psychologist? What got you? What made you think of doing that for your life?
Well, originally, I think it's because when I was little, I was always the person that everybody came to ask questions of or tell their problems to or to just confess to.
Mm-hmm.
And as I grew older, that was the case. It was with all my friends too. I seemed to be the sounding board. And it really happened that I was looking at making a career change from being a mother into doing something finally from motherhood into what am I going to do with the rest of my life.
Right.
And I decided to go back and get my master's degree in counseling because I thought, well, that would be something I know I'd enjoy doing because I love helping people and I want to help them to become all that the Lord wants them to be and to be the best person that they can be and to be able to know that they are a strong person too and that they can have some sense of fulfillment in their life too, and to understand how their problems can work for them instead of necessarily against them.
Tell me about your family. Like, where did you grow up, and what was your home like for you when you were younger?
I grew up in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I was originally born in Atlanta. My parents adopted me when they were in their 40s, when I was 3 months old. I did have an older brother who was 3 years and 4 months older than me. He was adopted, but was not my biological brother. We grew up in Brainerd, out where off of Talley Road. I lived in the same house most all my life with my mom and dad until I was about 11 or 12 years old. And then we moved across the street. We built a house and moved across the street next door to my grandmother. We had 7 acres when I was little. My dad got sick with a debilitating stroke back when I was around 10 years old.
Oh, wow.
And that's why I had to move because we had a pretty big house back then and 7 acres of land. And my mom just couldn't handle it. So my grandmother had 4 or 5 acres next to her house, and so we built a much smaller house and moved next to her. And so it was a great childhood when I was little, and then that kind of struck and changed my life pretty significantly.
I can imagine.
For a while. So.
How long have you been here at Temple? When did you start teaching here?
Well, I started teaching here in the fall of 2005. It's really kind of an unusual story how I got here. I was graduating with my master's in professional counseling from Ridgemont Graduate School in May, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I interviewed with Dr. Stiles in March or April, I can't really remember, because I heard that they had a position in the psychology department here at Temple, and I was really excited about that because I thought I would love to teach, and I felt like God had always called me to teach. So I came over and talked to Dr. Stiles, and he said, well, we'd love to have you, and you're next on our list, but we have a fellow that's got a terminal degree, a doctorate degree, that may come and teach for us. If he does, you know, we're going to go with him because you just have a master's. And I'm like, I totally understand. I never heard from him, so I assumed that they hired somebody. He called me on the phone, and he said, Starr, I don't know if you realized that we had hired somebody else. And I said, yes, sir, I did. And he said, well, you know, I knew you had a lot of people praying for you, and I'm not sure I want them praying for me like that ever, but the fellow we hired, he actually died, and so
Wow.
We were kind of wondering if you could come and teach for us, you know, starting this fall. And I remember just dead silence on the phone because I was taking in,
Yeah.
this person died, they want me to teach, I've got a month, oh my goodness.
Oh, I can imagine.
Yeah. And I was like, yeah, yeah, I do. Can I call you back? And I remember hanging up the phone and telling him, is it okay? Yeah, that's sure. And then the next thing I know, here I am 8 years later and still loving it.
When was a defining moment in your life that you can remember?
Well, my defining moment, I think everybody would say that it's different for each person. Mine was actually when I became a Christian, and I realized that I had been running from the Lord for a very long time. And how that happened is I had lived quite a wild life from the time I reached 13 or 14 until I could get out of the house. And I finally got out of the house, moved away from home, moved to a different city, partied, hardy, did everything you could possibly think of, and eventually was just killing myself. I got really, really, really sick, and continued to get sick off and on, but this time I was very sick, and I went to the doctor, and I sat in his waiting room realizing that I was getting really sick by the minute. I got back in the back of the room, and the nurse took my temperature and ran and got the doctor and said she has 104.5 temperature. He came in there and he said, look, you either go home, I'm going to give you a steroid shot, you go home right now and get help and get fluids, or I'm putting you in the hospital. I said, I don't want to go to the hospital. So I went home. I lay there on my bed, feeling a little bit better, but not much, and called my mom, who I hadn't spoken to in 3 months. I had not talked to her in 3 months. And called her and said, Mama, I need you. And being the loving mother that she was, she came down in the middle of the night, picked me up. And as I laid there in bed the next day, I thought, Lord, I'm going to die. If I don't change my way, I'm basically going to die. And I just knew it. And at that moment, he reached down, and I guess that was the whole change. I never went back. I did go back to my old life for a moment, a very brief moment, in Huntsville, Alabama, and lived there probably, maybe 1 or 2 months longer, and looked at my life, looked at the guy I was dating, looked at everything and said, no, I gotta leave. So my mom said if I would come back up to Chattanooga, she would send me to Covenant College to go to school for free. She'd pay for everything. And I said, okay, that's what I gotta do. So I picked up, moved all my stuff home, moved back in with my mom, and started school at Covenant College, at a Christian college, and it was, I know now how people that aren't Christians feel when they go to a Christian school. You know, because at that moment, when I was in this covenant and I realized how much, even though I was raised in a Christian home, how much I didn't know, it was quite a shock. There was also one other moment that I want to tell you about, that this way you can choose, because I thought about this too. I went to a Super Bowl party. I ran around with a bunch of people that drank quite heavily and did drugs and did everything else, and I was at this huge party, and of course alcohol was flowing quite a lot. But we're sitting there talking. It was on a Sunday. Super Bowl's always on a Sunday. We're sitting there talking. And this might have been the start of all that. And we're sitting talking about church. At the time, I was dating a guy that was Baptist. I was Presbyterian. One of the couples that we hung around with, one was Catholic and one was Episcopalian. So we rotated on going to church. One week we go to Baptist, one week wherever. Mm-hmm. This particular Sunday, I was talking to some of our other friends, and I said, yeah, we went to Episcopal church today. I'd never been to Episcopal church. And they looked at me, and I'd always thought I was a good, a quote Christian girl. And they looked at me, and they said, you went to church? And I was like, yeah, I went to church. I usually go every Sunday. I said, why? And they said, because you don't hit me as the kind of person that would go to church. And that really smacked me right in the face.
I can imagine.
So those were my two biggies. That one made me start thinking. And then when I got sick, I really realized I don't want this anymore. So my defining moment, finding God in Christ.
That's awesome.